Good evening. Um, let's have a word of prayer before we begin. Dear Father, be with us as we talk and share and hopefully learn. And as we look at our culture and the shifting changes and how it affects the church, Lord, I ask you be with us as we do so. And tonight is be a opportunity for us to learn so that we know how to understand and speak and help our church to grow. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so what I'm going to share with you over the next three presentations, which go tonight, tomorrow morning, and then tomorrow afternoon, is what I normally have been sharing when I go and make my presentations to pastors or when I have my class, although the class is much longer, when I go teach doctoral students at the seminary or whatever. But my concern as I began, as I'll get into it, is how the church is relating to young adults. And that comes from those from ages 20 through 40. That's normally what we consider those who are in the young adult feature, usually those that are out of high school. So in my experience, what I did in Wausau, Wisconsin, where I wrote my dissertation and this project really got going, was to watch a church grow from about 45 to 200 people in about 18 to 20 months. And then out was going, and most of them were from young adults. Although I did see and notice that all people groups grew, all people groups, including boomers and busters and everybody coming on up, they all increased. The only part I was disappointed in was the high school age grew a little bit, but not like I had hoped. But anyway, so this beginning tonight, I would like to kind of set the whole stage for this, and this has to do with the perfect storm. Now, I received a letter just this last January from a student that I had known for a long time in Wausau, Wisconsin, and he was at Southern Adventist University, and some people have gone there, I understand. And he said this, I got this just this January, Pastor, I can't say I don't go to church. I do every so often. There's nothing that draws me to sit in a church for 4 to 5 hours on Sabbath morning. There's nothing that draws me to sit in a church for 4 to 5 hours on Sabbath morning. I still believe Jesus, and I believe in the teachings of the church. I am the same old me with maybe a more adult view of the world. I've read articles from our church leaders that say I am doing, it's fairly typical of my age group. I don't know if he read one of mine or not, I don't know. We don't go to church, we don't go to church, we're not forsaking the church, we just don't go. And we know what is right and wrong. Maybe it should bother me, but I don't feel bad about not going to church. I live my life as I should, doing what is right, avoiding wrong as much as possible. Did I miss something somewhere? Why am I feeling the same things other Adventists my age feel? I have come to you because I'll know you'll shoot me straight. And I've shot him several times. But I really have come to you about this because you seem to have a good grasp on the culture, the trends, specifically interests of my age group, late 20s, 30s, and so forth. If you need to ask more information or if you need more to probe, by all means do so. I've got nothing to hide. I'm human except for that fact. And as I read his letter, it is so indicative of so many of our young adults in our church. So with that kind of background, that's kind of what prompted me to get going and to try to find some solutions to this process. William Johnson, remember he used to be the editor of the Adventist Review. William Johnson wrote a book called The Fragmenting of Adventism. Can you read that all right? Yes, okay. It came out Pacific Press in 1995, and he was projecting ahead what was going to happen to Adventism in the next 5 years. And a lot of what he said made a lot of sense. But in chapter 4, it was talking about where he was speaking about generational differences. Those differences in the generation, we've talked a lot about it. And I want you to notice this. The generations, they have gone different ways for as long as recorded history. Today, however, the gap has widened to a chasm. This is because the family structure that sustained society and mitigated generational differences has fallen apart. Today in the United States, very few families have grandparents in the home, and some would applaud that, I guess. More than half of all mothers with infants work outside the home today. With divorce widespread, parental patterns and relationships have become very confusing. And so young adults are facing all kinds of different issues and different things and going in different directions. I would like to suggest to you that I don't think that's what is it. Now, in 1995, I probably said, yeah, I would buy that, because we didn't understand what was happening in the cultural shift that had taken place. We are actually in what we would say a perfect storm about what is taking place between young people and the church. And in that storm, we have these difficulties where we're trying to hang on for dear life, and the church is shaking and concerned about what is going to take place. So, I was asked to be the young adult pastor, collegiate young adult pastor at Boston Temple. Here's a picture of it. It's actually only about 2 blocks from Fenway Park in Boston. So it's 104 years old when the church was when I was there. So I was at Boston Temple, and I was all optimistic. Oh, this is going to go great. I'll be the youth and young adult for collegiate. And I said, oh, that's good. And then in the conference said, oh, Bill, you do a great job. And I said, yeah, I'll do a great job. I know, because I just love this age group. So I went, and I was there for 2 years, and pretty much a flop. And I had a wonderful relationship with the young people that were there. They're going, the college students who have come to those great universities from around. You could walk just a couple blocks in any direction from the church and hit a campus. There are 217 campuses and colleges and universities in Boston proper itself. That does not include Boston College. Real close was Boston University, and there was Berklee College of Music, and it was just all around, and Northeastern, and all these great schools. So they asked me to do that, and I was so disappointed after 2 years because I had great relationships with young people, but ministry was just not happening like I had hoped. And when I left, they kind of ran out of money, so I had to go somewhere. So when I left, I kind of thought, I was really disappointed in it. And it happened, and I kept wondering, what in the world, what is the problem? Why are we having such an issue? And why are our young people so bored in church and so having such a hard time? I'll talk more about this tomorrow. So I discovered that the culture had changed and that we are no longer in modernity. Does that make sense to any of you? Modernity. We'll define that as we go. Well, what happened is mostly we were a church of builders and boomers. And builders are now kind of fading off, aren't they? Oh yeah. But what? Builders are ahead of the boomers, the seniors. The builders used to run the church. And then the boomers have come up, and they have gone through. Boomers are the generation who went through the 60s. To have happened, they were in college at that time. And so we have that group that is generally be trying to run the church, generally trying to have happen. And then we have some young people that come along, and they see the world in a totally different way. They don't see it as we see it. They see the world and they kind of like the changes that are happening. They kind of like what's happened because they're more comfortable with it. But generally, our reaction is all is well. And so we just keep plowing on as if everything that we're doing is exactly the same. I forgot to bring in Leonard Sweet's book. Leonard Sweet wrote a book called Soul Tsunami. And it's a thick book. It's full of examples, very readable. Leonard Sweet teaches in Divinity School up in Seattle. But Leonard Sweet wrote this book about how Soul Tsunami, about the cultural change and the postmodern world as it came. It was absolutely incredible, the changes that he described. And as I read that book, I couldn't put it down because yes, I see that everywhere as I would look around. Sometimes when I've talked to people, they say, well, who cares? Who cares about what's going on? What difference does it make? Now, here's this dear fellow, John 3:16, which reminds me of a short story. And that is, I was watching a football game, and it was the color coming. Before the game had started, they were panning the stadium, and they were looking, and big bold print was there, was John 3:16. And the color commentators that were talking were saying, well, look at that, John 3:16. Well, what is that? And the other fellow said, well, I think that is the quarterback stats, John so-and-so. Isn't that his stats that are in there and going? And they go, oh, yeah, that's what that is. And they were sincere. They had not a clue what John 3:16 was, because the culture had changed so much. Things had changed so much that people weren't going to church so much anymore. And so he grew up in a secular world. I had a lady call me one time, or talk to me one time after a meeting that I was at, a secular meeting, and she said, you're a pastor, aren't you? And I said, yes, I'm a pastor. She was an educated woman. She was a registered nurse. She was about a woman in her late 30s. And she said, I know absolutely nothing about the Bible, except I know Jesus is something, and we say his word a lot when we're angry. And we use that word, but I know nothing about it. And I'm saying, here's a woman who grew up in America who has no clue what Jesus on the cross is. No clue about anything. And she said, can you help me understand? Well, I said, where in the world do I start when you don't even know who anybody is? So I gave her the video, Jesus of Nazareth, it's a four-part series. It goes through his life and the miracles. And I could tell just where she was. She'd call me and she'd say, Bill, why is that man pushing Jesus underneath the water? Oh, he's being baptized. Oh, baptized. What is that? And then she'd call back and she would say, did he really do those miracles? And I said, yes. And then she'd call back, did he really rise from the dead? And I said, yes, exactly. So we live in a world that's so different that we don't know where we are. How come that's no issue? Are we clueless? That's what I'm supposed to say. Are we clueless? Does anybody know what's going on? Does anybody have a clue of what's going on? As you know, we have shifted to the digital culture, where everything is digital. Why, you look right back here, and we have a digital deal. I'm working digitally here. I have digitally prepared everything. We have shifted to a digital culture. And so everything's happening. I was talking to two girls that they were riding in the car with their parents, one daughter and then a friend of hers. And they were on a trip together, and they were sitting there text messaging each other so that mom and dad would not hear what they were talking about. Right there next to the, sitting in the same back seat. Digitally communicating that way. Okay, so we have had huge cultural changes or shifts. So this is going to be a little bit academic, but I think you're pretty good at this. So we'll try to get it. For a long time, for thousands of years, we were basically stuck in the medieval period where everything went the same. We had the same fields, we had the same tools, we had the same donkey, we was riding the little boats. That basically ended in about 1500, that shift. What happened? Well, the Gutenberg press came out. Movable type, the age of enlightenment, the discovery of science, the rise of reason, the Reformation came on the heels of that. And the world began to change. And the world began to go through a process of changing. And so we find the Reformation happening in 1517 when Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Chapel. We find this huge change and this cultural change. But prior to that, everything kind of went the same. We call that from 1500 to 1970 the modern era. That's what the word modernity comes from, the modern era. And so the modern era comes where everything was built on a scientific basis, logic, arguments. I'll look at that more in detail. But it meant that wherever you were in the world, you could come to a conclusion that everybody else would if they had the same information. For example, if I took 2 parts of hydrogen and 1 part of oxygen, and I put it together and I lit it under a flame, boom, it would turn into water, no matter where I was. Whether I was here or whether I was in Africa or wherever I was in the world, that would be always the same because it was the scientific method. The principles were always the same. But in 1970, they came crashing to an end. And we'll look at that in just a moment. So then came what was known as the postmodern era. And I'm going to look at that with you. So for about 30 years, we went, and we're still on part of us in the postmodern era. We have people that are sitting here that live in the modernity, live in the modern era. If that's your physician, that's what you want, or your dentist. You want him to be based on scientific deal. You don't want to go up to him and be like postmodern. Well, you come up and a postmodern dentist or physician would say, well, I have a feeling about what's wrong with you. And as I was feeling about that, don't tell me how you're feeling. I just kind of sense it in the air, and I know. Some type of thing. You wouldn't want to have a physician like that. He said, can you take an x-ray or something first? Oh, no, we don't want to do that. Because that couldn't possibly be right. I just sense the feeling about it. I'm going to give you some examples. And now we thought we were in a postmodern era, but now we're in a meta-modernity era, which is now coming on. And that meta-modernity era is going back and taking the concepts from modern science, from the science period, accepting them, but already knowing they're not true. We just kind of live on them because that's the way it is, but we know they're not true. We know it couldn't possibly be true, but we just accept them and go on anyway. Now, don't you find that kind of crazy? But I kind of feel maybe it's swinging back the pendulum. So in the modern era, we have one worldview. We have a worldview that's going to be the same everywhere around. So if we share the 27 beliefs here or in Africa or somewhere else, everybody will buy in because everybody will see we have one worldview. That's how it is. In the postmodern era, we have many worldviews. Each one of you has your own worldview, and it doesn't matter if mine is different. It doesn't make any difference. So modernity didn't work very well. It didn't last very well. It didn't come across very well. So here's just a basic look about how this goes. Modernity has one worldview. Postmodern has many worldviews. But in meta-modernity, we live with the ideas of modernity, but we know they couldn't possibly be true. We've gone far beyond them, and we don't look at that. So in today's universities, a lot of the new philosophy is being taught to our students. And so they're being taught postmodernism view, and we're going to look at that in a moment. And they're being taught about meta-modernity, and they're going on, and so their worldview, I'm particularly talking about public universities, are sharing this because what happened in modernity, all that scientific stuff couldn't be true. We didn't find a way that we could keep us from having war. We thought we would never be a war. There'd be one world war, and that would be it. We'd all be done. We've had many wars since then. So all the things that we thought that man could come up and decide, he'll get rid of all disease, he'll get rid of all this because we know science now, and yet it hasn't happened. And so it's become a disappointment. We don't have to look very far as we go back to in Paris when they had the shooting of the police there and the radicals, the what? Yeah, Charlie Hebdo with the shooting there in January, and of course you have examples all around. All right, so here is the concept of deconstruction. Jacques Derrida is a French philosopher, and he came up with a concept as moving into postmodern called deconstruction. Deconstruction, very simply, is you looking at an idea, a concept. You look at all the parts, you take it apart, and you say, oh, looking at this by itself, it couldn't possibly be true. So it pulls apart the modern thought. It pulls it apart. Very popular in society. Deconstruction is the practice of unraveling meaning from written language to show What was written is put together out of the assumption that they just cannot be true. We know it could not be true. So all those assumptions that we had, that we put together on the modern thought, are wrong. And so we take it all apart. So what in the world does that mean? What process does it mean? Now here's how it impacts the church. So it affects personal behaviors and how we live our life and our personal behaviors, how we're going to be, how we're going to have our lives. For example, since my personal belief is equal to the belief of the church in modern time, in authority, then who's to say the church is more right than what I believe is right? See? Matthew is caught up in that. How do you know that the church is more right? I mean, everybody's right in their own view, so why should I bother with what the church is teaching? Why should I teach that? I mean, it's their view, just their assumption, and why wouldn't it do that? So we get this kind of thing, I don't see anything wrong with it type of response. I was sharing with a person and talking, and just brief, she says, you're a Seventh-day Adventist? And I said, yeah. So you go to church on Saturday? And she said, and why do you do that? And I said, well, because Jesus did, and because the Bible teaches that, and so forth. And she goes, well, I don't think that's important. And went on. And I said, well, wait a minute, how long have you looked at it? Well, I haven't, but I don't see any value in it. Well, good. Immediately dismissed it without ever investigating it. Didn't even have to look at it. Well, I don't see it important to me. That's the very thing that it goes at. Your beliefs are yours and mine are mine. And that's how it works together. Second area has to do with biblical hermeneutics, or how we understand the Bible. And perhaps this is the most serious for us. Jacques Derrida came and he talked about the concept of presence. Presence is one of these false assumptions. It is the idea that the meaning of the words is limited to the intents of the speaker or writer. It's called presence. And so the limitation of what the person is saying is now down to, you don't have to worry about what the author was trying to say. It's what you think. Here's an example. So many of you know interpretation of Scripture, as you could say. You know Joe Kidder. He's been up here in a long time. Joe Kidder, I know Joe Kidder. We went to classes a lot together. Joe Kidder believes that it is important, and so do I, so I can use this example, that it is important for me when I get up and speak about what the Scriptures say on Sabbath morning, that I better understand as best as humanly possible what the prophet or the apostle was trying to say. Because it's not my job. You're not looking to say, what does Bill Bossert think? You're looking to say, please open the Scriptures and share with me what Paul is saying. It is important for you to get to that. And so seminary has taught me, you get to that point. You stay with that Bible till you find out what the author was talking about, and then you can share it. I know Brandon has that same kind of philosophy. He's been taught that. Before you open the Scriptures and start getting up and preaching to people, what does the author have to say? Okay, you got that? So he's looking back at the author, looking at the author of the Bible to see what would happen. But here's the thing about what's happened in our world. Okay, present says, it doesn't matter what Paul said. It doesn't matter. Don't be so silly and limit yourself to the author's intention. Just read the words, and your interpretation is just as good as Material Girl's. It doesn't matter. Let her have her view, and let her just take and share what happened. So I wanted to talk to you about my next door neighbor. When I was living in Portland, I had a next door neighbor. He was an author, and a very interesting fellow. And he said his name was Dawson, Lawrence Hall Dawson. Larry Dawson lived next door to me. And he was a rather interesting person. He came out one day, very friendly fellow, and he came out one day and says, "Oh, Bill, guess what?" And I said, "What?" And I said, I am writing a book on the book of Revelation. And I go, well, how wonderful. That's great. And we were standing out there in the yard, and I said, what, are you doing a word-by-word study of the book? Or are you studying the cycles that are in there, of the different cycles? Are you combing the literature prophecies that are there in the Bible? And he kind of gets this blank face on, look at me, and he goes, well, no. And I said, well, how are you going about your material? So this is his book, by the way. So he says, well, I take my Bible, and I have a triangle piece of cloth I put on the table. And I open the Bible to Revelation, and I lay it down on the triangle piece of cloth. And then I take off the cross on my chain, and I close my eyes, and I sway the cross back and forth across the Bible, and the Spirit then gives me what I should type. Very postmodern. Doesn't matter what the author is writing. So we get this book. He had this book published. He gave me a copy. Wasn't that nice of him to give me a copy? I've tried to read it. I have no idea what he's talking about. Because if you're looking at it, it's kind of the God-mind thing, the Spirit God-mind thing, doing about giving and sharing and receiving. And you'll find words in here capitalized and so forth that the Spirit told him, now capitalize and start the book from the back to the front. And he said, I'm so excited when he handed me the book that he'd finally finished. When he handed me the book, he said, I'm so excited because I've been invited to go all over Russia and represent Christianity with my book. The influence of postmodern and the changing culture. It's not just a division of the families. We have a division and problem of how we look at the world and how that society goes. Everyone's interpretation is valued. All are right in their own worldview and in their belief structure. Okay, the second has to do, process, or the third one, has to do with evangelism. How we share evangelism around and how the culture has affected that. Now, Bruce Moyer was in charge of all the student missionaries, he used to be, from Andrews University. He teaches missions there. He's in the mission department. And I've known him for years. And so he tours a lot. He goes around and visits the student missionaries and mission projects and the tent maker missions and all this kind of stuff. So he was around there, and he was in Calcutta. And a few years ago, he says, well, I'm in Calcutta. I think I'll stop by and see Mother Teresa. So he goes up, and he knocks on the door with Mother Teresa, and he says on the door of her mission, and a woman comes to the door, and she says, yes. And he said, is it possible I would like to have a few minutes of Mother Teresa's time? I'd like to talk with her. And he gave her his card from Andrews, teaching. She said, just a minute. She closed the door. Now he's standing in the squalor and everything outside the mission, and he waits and waits and waits. About 20 minutes, the door opens again and said, Mother Teresa will see you now. So he goes in, had a wonderful time chatting with her and her mission and what she was doing. And then after he finished, it's about 20 minutes, and he started to leave. And on the way out, another young lady, not the one who greeted at the door, but another young lady came up, and she spoke to him in American English, and she said, oh, you're from Andrews University. And he said, well, yes, I teach at the seminary there. She says, I'm an Adventist. And he said, oh, you are? Well, what are you doing here? I'm a student missionary. And he said, well, I know all the student missionaries around the world, and we don't have one assigned to Mother Teresa in Calcutta. I don't know you. And she goes, I'm a student and I'm a missionary. I don't need the church to tell me where to go or how to go. She raised her money, got on the plane, flew to Calcutta, asked Mother Teresa if she could serve, and there she was, serving, doing her bit. Didn't need the church. So the organization and the mission and evangelism of the church has totally changed and gone its own way. So question I like to ask pastors is I have a whole pastor, just in Northern California, I was a pastor and said, why should I join your church? Well, you should join our church because we keep the Sabbath. Well, I keep the Sabbath. I don't need to join your church. Oh, and you watch pastors, they're looking at the floor hoping I don't call on them. You know, why should I join their church? Don't you think a pastor should know why I should join your church? Yes?
Can you ask that? Is it the SDA church or your local church?
Join your local church. Yeah. Why should I join your church? And I say, well, then we go, we love Jesus there. Well, I can love Jesus and not join your church. Ooh. Well, you can serve as an officer in our church if you join our church. Good. I don't want to join your church then to have happen. Why should I join your church? Why should I be part of that to have happen? We'll talk about that some more. Okay, so impact on evangelism. This is what happens to a changing culture. No need to join any church or denomination. I go sailing on, it's just fine, happen. In postmodern world, it doesn't matter because I'm doing my own thing now. Very individualistic. Number two, modernity-based doctrinal positions are suspect and no longer relevant. If we're based on the logic of the Reformation, and our church is built on the concepts of the Reformation theology. We built them. I'll show you the truth out of the Word. I will build my argument. I'll show you my doctrinal positions. That's all part of modern thought. It's not medieval thought. It's not Jesus' thought. They didn't put the 27 beliefs together, 28. We do. We have that structure because it came out of the Reformation, period. Not interested in assembly line faith. Well, we're going to give you 2 lessons, and if you complete those, then we'll give you 2 more. And we only have 730 lessons to give you. And by the time you're finished, we'll be ready for you to be baptized. Say, forget it. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be part of that assembly line. You put me and lock me in. So evangelism. They had an evangelistic series. They've been planning for it for a year in Boston. They're planning for a full year. And they had a wonderful guy came out from Amazing Facts to be the evangelist and work for a full year. And they spent a lot of money on advertising and got the building and everything and tried to get everybody excited. Opening night, nobody showed. They sent out 35,000 flyers in Boston. Not one person showed. They went for 3 nights. Nobody showed. Why? Because it was out of the culture. It was not part of the culture. It was missing that part. The belief that non-Christians face has some truth too. We all have truth. We all have little parts. So the American Indians have truth. The Buddhists have truth. We all have truth. It's just we have our part, they have their part type of thing, type of philosophy. Okay. Postmodern challenges to the church is to our doctrinal structure. Certainly because you believe what you want to believe. To our global mission, as I mentioned, this girl, I go anywhere I want to go. I don't need the church to tell me where I need to go. It challenges our organizational system because we don't need a hierarchy anymore. It's more flat to do. Churches that kind of reach our size, we kind of get along with the conference, but we kind of do our own thing. You know, we kind of, we need you, we help you, help us out, but we're going to do our own agenda, where a small church is far more dependent upon a conference to help. To our financial support. And so it used to be that all the boomers say, oh yeah, I pay my tithe, I pay this, I pay that. But the new generation, the younger generation said, well, where's my money going? What are you going to do with it? And I think the church should respond and say, this is where your money's going. This is what your money's doing. I think standing up and collecting an offering and saying, it's paying for the lights, doesn't sail. if we're saying you are participating in our church's mission. And part of that is the lights, part of it's this, part of it's the building. This is part of our mission. Mission-driven has much greater support than that. So how frustrating that we would have this type of response, and we are in a perfect storm, I think, in the cultural situation in which we are in. Okay, so it just happened that I went to church one day, and a young lady came in across the narthex. I was sitting in the narthex. This happened in Minnesota. And she came bouncing in, and she said to me, "Pastor, how do you like my new tattoo?" Oh. So what did I say? What did I going to say? How do I like her new tattoo? So my response was, oh. Why did you decide to do that? Oh, yeah, mine. You picked that? Well, look at that. So I never endorsed it, but I didn't criticize it. Why does she say that when I came in? She's trying to see if she could come in with a new tattoo and see if the church would accept her. That's what she was really asking. So when she came, I knew that. So the test was, how do you like my new tattoo? How are you going to react to my tattoo, Pastor? And so why, wonderful. And I welcomed her to let her know that her tattoo was not going to break our relationship. Now, she's gone off and done some wild things that I go, woo, girl. But she still talks to me on Facebook. Still talks to me. So they would like peace. They're saying peace while they slip out the back door. And we have urgent problem. It's called the graying of Adventism. I'll talk about some tomorrow. In modernity, our church has become very print reliant. We are very reliant on our presses, and to keep that as part of the era that came out of the era of modernity. And so we have our printing presses going all the time. Now we have fewer, and you know that, how they shrunk down to do that. But we used to have printing presses all running all the time, 24 hours a day, filling our Adventist Book Center with all the leaves of autumn. All the leaves of autumn. So what we came down with is we had a logical and reasonable explanation for the things that we believe. And we have a book. I have 27 beliefs there because I like the picture better. But instead of the 28, we have 28 doctrinal statements that are logical, that are put together, that we use all these passages of Scripture, that we have them all in one place, and we think, wow, that is wonderful. We have them. So what we believe and hold is that North America's church form and spirituality has basically become a head trip. If I can get you to agree with my doctrinal statements, particularly my 13, if I have 13 statements, if I can get you to believe that, then I'll get you to sign our card, and then I will get the tank filled, and we will have a baptism, and you will be baptized. You'll become a member of our church, and the beauty is you can do it and be baptized and never know Jesus as your Savior. Because we've made it a head trip. Now, what's more important, the head trip or the heart of knowing Christ is your Savior? So we welcome to the World Wide Web, and we have a book. Now I have some handouts here. So I'm going to ask if I could get a little help here. Could you just help me a little bit with that? And we're just going to do some handing out. Could you help there and just sprinkle this down? This book, Souls in Transition, is a wonderful book dealing with young adults. I highly recommend it. But assuming that you may not pick it up and read it, I have a summary. So I have a summary for you of 31 different things. I'm not going to go over every one of these with you, which you will be delighted. We need to pass these out a little faster. I'm going to be done tonight before they ever get to the back row. Here we go. We'll give you one. And just take some. There you go. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll get some more going. Have we got these back here? This is going very well now. Stimulating. Soul's Transition is one of the textbooks that I use for my classes, and it is an incredible book that Christian Smith wrote, and it has some things that I think are important. Number one, young adults are constantly experiencing life transitions. Constantly. My life is full of a lot of stuff. And it used to be that, when I graduated from college, I went and applied for a job, got a job, went and did that, stayed with that for the 41 years, kind of make that, and although I moved from church to church, and that's what I've been in. But my son has made transitions, many different ones already. Different jobs, different places, different things already. Both of them have, in fact. Both of them that were going. Some are trying to stand on their own and not being very successful. And even there was a movie called Failure to Launch. I don't know if you saw that. Guy was 30 or 35, something like that, and he's still living at home with his parents. Not unusual to have that happen. So much to figure out, so many structures after high school is all gone, and now I'm trying to figure out where in the world is going to happen in my life. What is going to take place about I don't have enough money. I feel I'm constantly broke all the time and having difficulty getting a job or whatever have happened. I may have come from a broken home and come into a broken world. Generally, they have no regrets about past decisions, behaviors, or problems. They don't, they just, that doesn't matter. We're sailing on anyway to have happen. Right or wrong or easy, the majority are moral intuitive. Intuition. What I assume is right or wrong. What is right or wrong. I've been interested in watching the riots in Baltimore and now in Philadelphia, and to hear some of these young people speaking and sharing about their anger and about their experience. And I hear in their voices a lot of this moral looking at it, that it just depends on what's happening. And a lady, okay, so they got indicted. Now it's time to convict all of them, all the officers. Time to convict. They're all guilty. Well, they told them what was wrong, so here it is. No processing, not giving a response. It's time to hang them and let them go. All that kind of thing. Well, you can look down through that. We won't want to take all night with that to have happen. So there's your handout. Did you see Bill Gates there? He enjoyed that paper very much. So we have the perfect storm going on. Perfect things are happening all around us, and yet the church seems to just sleep on. As if things are always the same. Nothing's happening, nothing's going on. Everything is just sailing on as it always has been. Always has happening with us. Okay, are you familiar with the show The Family Feud? All right, well, we're going to have our own Family Feud here a little bit. Another handout, sorry. Another handout to go. Here's some. She would like one. There you go. There's some coming over here. We'll pass some over here. You can pass those around. Family Feud. Oh, thank you. I didn't see you there. Thank you. Okay, this is our own Family Feud. Now, here's the deal. This is from my dissertation. And these particular questions, I asked Adventist young people. So get out a piece of paper, or a pencil, I'm sorry. Get out a pencil, and you're going to take this quiz and see how close you are guessing. Now, you have to guess two things. One is your response. You put down first your response. And then the second is, what do you think the Adventist young adults responded? What do you think their answer was to it? Okay? You're ready. So here's the first question from Richard Dawson, and he wants to ask, do you consider yourself a religious person? Watch the language. Do you consider yourself a religious person? So first, in that box over there at the end of the question, you write down yes or no for yourself. Okay? Yes or no for yourself. And then what you're going to put next to that is what you think the Adventist young adults responded in my thesis. What do you think they said? Would they consider themselves a religious person? You got it? Okay. Mark your thing down. Still heads are working. Still heads are thinking. Still people trying to find a pen that writes. You got it? Ready? Here we go. All right, so we go on, and the survey said that 90% of the young adults said yes, that they consider themselves a religious person. Now, how did you do on that? Anybody get that high? Get on that? 90% of that? Yeah, about that? Okay, why would they say that? This is something we don't understand about young adults. They are more spiritual. They are more spiritual than boomers and builders. They are more spiritual. Doesn't mean they're more Christian, but they're more spiritual. So they're more open to talk about faith than maybe they've ever been before. This may be our golden opportunity. Number 2, are religious traditions, other than your own, true? I'm asking Adventists, for you answer the question first. Are other traditions other than your own true? Or is Buddhism true? Is Hinduism true? Is Islam true? The great American spiritual American Indians, is that true? So you mark down for yourself. Now you want to put the next thing is, what about young adults? How would they respond? Adventist young adults, how they're going to respond? Would they say traditions other than their own are true? You got that? Okay, you ready? All right, so we look at the survey, and the survey said 65% yes or somewhat true, are leaning that way. They'd say, yeah, everybody has a little bit of truth. Everybody. You see, in modernity, in the modern world, there is one truth, one worldview, and Adventists have it, don't we? Adventists have it. But among the young adults in the postmodern world, well, we all have a little bit. Why are we any different? We look. You see, the problem is, well, it doesn't matter. And I asked the question of our congregation, is it important that my children grow up to be Adventists? Well, yeah, but they could be Baptists or something else, or maybe they like, it doesn't really matter. That type of thing, that effect. Number 3, when you think of the Adventist church, are you personally embarrassed about being a Seventh-day Adventist? When you think of the Adventist church, I'm surprised Richard Dotson would ask this question. When you think of the Adventist church, are you personally embarrassed about being a Seventh-day Adventist? Okay, write down your response, then next to it what you think the young adults are going to respond. Okay, you ready? Okay, Richard says, survey says, 65% said not at all. Not at all embarrassed. See, in the postmodern, it doesn't matter because everybody gets to have their own worldview. Yeah, it doesn't matter. You're a Seventh-day Adventist, you're a Baptist, you're this, you're that, you're this, you're a Muslim, you're a Buddhist. Wonderful. Doesn't matter. Number 4, some within the church may see Adventist standards or even Adventist doctrinal positions of faith different than you do. How do you view these other Adventists who hold different positions on issues from you? How do you hold that? So you may want to write more than just a yes or no. You may have a little word or two there about how that would be. So some within the church may hold doctrinal positions or standards different than you do. I was in a church where the pastor always had to wear a white shirt in the pulpit. If he ever showed up like this, you knew he was suspect to some kind of corruption. Don't you just put it on, and see how close you are. Okay, so survey said 80% said everyone's entitled to their own opinion. So we find among builder generation are the most intolerant. Boomers are more tolerant, but the young adult version are very tolerant of different views. Very different, doesn't matter. Yeah.
Not all builder generations are intolerant.
Correct. Yes, yes, but generally that we can find them more intolerant of them. Number 5, if you could say the one thing that would keep you from attending the local Adventist church, what would it be? One thing, put down one word. One thought? What would it be? If you would keep you from coming to the Adventist church, what would it be? What would it be? You mark it down what you would be and then what you think they would say. The one thing where they would say, I'm not coming anymore. All right, you ready? Survey said being judged poorly. You see, that's why she said, Pastor, what do you think of my tattoo? See? She's waiting to see if I was going to judge her poorly. And I want, in my church, it's my goal, in my church, for all of my young people to know they are always welcome in my presence, that I am not going to be judging them poorly. I may be the pastor, but they are certainly welcome with all their hard knocks or whatever they're doing. That's all right. They're still welcome. Because wasn't Jesus that way? Didn't people be able to be with Jesus? All right, next one. 6. Do you have close friends near your own age who also attend the same local church? Do you have friends that do that? This is kind of an easier one to mark like that. Survey says 75% said yes. Now, this is a small sample, so I didn't do thousands, but it was a small sample. Number 7. Would there be a better time for you to attend a worship service than on Sabbath mornings at 11 a.m.? Remember, these are young adults. Okay? So would there be a better time for them to come? Okay, mark it down. What you think it's going to happen. Survey said 70% said no. 11 o'clock's just fine. That kind of blew me away. I thought, well, they're going to want it at 1:30 or 5:30 or whatever. No, 11 o'clock's just fine. Don't worry about it. Number 8. What do you consider the most important element or part of the worship service? What do you consider the most important part of the worship service? Okay, you mark yours, then what do you think young adults would say? What do you think young adults would say? Survey says singing together. And of course, as a pastor, I said, what about the sermon? It didn't get anything. I just got to wait. I work hard on that. What is your preference for various worship styles? And I gave them samples of all kinds of different worship styles. Survey says contemporary Christian music and praise choruses is what they chose. 70%. Why? We'll talk about this more tomorrow. Because young adults want to feel their faith and they want to encounter the living God. And those kind of choruses touch their lives. Number 10. If I want to go to heaven, it is important that I carefully follow God's holy law, for it is a vital key to salvation. If I want to go to heaven, it is important that I carefully follow God's holy law, for it is a vital key to salvation. Okay? Survey says, true or mostly true, 70%. And that shared with me, young adults here do not understand grace of Christ. They do not understand the grace of Christ. I was talking with a Lutheran pastor. Lutherans should understand the great grace of Christ like no one else. Lutheran, the 95 Thesis, the just shall live by faith. And I was talking to him and he said, I constantly have to remind our young people and our members that we are saved by the grace of Christ. Constantly reminding them. And I can see when I heard this from the young people, I said, they do not understand. They've been sitting in our pews, but they don't understand grace. They don't understand the part that it plays. Do you volunteer your services to help those in need? Do you volunteer your services to help those in need? Survey says 50% of the young adults say yes, and particularly if they are short commitment. So it's not like I'm going to go do this every day for weeks, but if I can do it on a weekend, or if I can go down and feed the homeless, or if I can go do this and make a difference quickly, they will respond and they will do it. I could see that in my church before I asked that. Have you ever taken a mission or a service excursion into another culture as a volunteer? Have you ever done that? I think that's important to take our young adults out to see that. Survey said 50% said yes already. Okay, I'm going to play a video for you that I would like you. This has been taken, I got because of knowing people at the North American division. They went down to Christ Church, and they were interviewing people as they were going into this church there. And I would like for you to carefully listen to what you hear the young adults saying. Okay? See if you can pick up, listen very carefully as this happens. Okay, are you ready? Here he goes.
Hi, we're here at Christ Church in New Zealand, and we're here to interview people on why people don't go to church anymore. So we're going to step inside here and just interview some people, okay? Let's go.
I don't know if the church has a lot of relevance to the reason people make decisions today. I think people tend to look at life in a more secular way. I think there's also a lot more kind of spiritual thinking that people are involved in that isn't necessarily attached to organized religion.
I think the culture has changed, not really the culture has changed, the people has changed, and also the things the people want to do. But the problem is the church hasn't changed. The church is still the old one. It's still against condoms, and it's still the old church.
I think religion has moved less from the public sphere and more into the private sphere. That's what I've always thought. It's kind of more people don't feel they need to practice it as much, and it's more something more personal probably nowadays. You don't really, it's like you don't need that sense of belonging as much, because like religion was like more something that, you know, how you would belong, a way to belong to a group or a society, and then you were kind of ridiculed for not fitting in. But I think nowadays we have other ways of belonging to different groups, and people don't feel pressured into having to fit into a certain way that society wants them to be.
Probably because the church has let them down in the past. Probably because the church being man, you know, we have our own struggles and life gets in the way for ourselves. And I think a lot of people look at Christians and think that they're perfect because they are Christians. They don't realise that we are simply human beings as such. And they look to the church as being this great sinless group of people, and they feel let down when the church simply can't meet up to those standards that they're expected to. So I think that's why, and then they get bitter about that. So yeah, I think it's probably people's expectations of the church, and thinking that once you're a Christian you actually become this sinless, perfect person, when in reality you don't. I mean, you know you are, but you still fall every day. So I think when the church falls, the world cheers. I think that's really sad.
People feel that the church has lost its way, and that the church no longer provides kind of the values that Christianity once stood for, and that Christianity now stands for people that are misrepresenting the original values of Jesus Christ, which were communalism and love and solidarity, and it's now been turned into Brian Tamaki and George Bush and whatnot.
Okay, speaking personally from my own point of view, I was brought up with church, and went to church when I was a kid, but now I don't go so often. I like my churches to be quite traditional and old.
I think, people today tend to look at the church as something that is quite outdated.
I think it must be more open-minded. So the whole thing should be more open to a lot of different ideas, because I think everybody is moving so much, traveling so much, has not only one idea about what he believes in. So I think it must be more open for different beliefs, and also for different people, and just be more open-minded, and like the Baha'i religion probably. So that's one of the religions I would be really much into it. And so just be more acceptive, probably?
I'm not quite sure what, like, a lot of people find different things appealing, but I think the best way for Christians to find their way back to the original message of Jesus is to go out and do the work of Jesus, and work for the poor and help the poor, and work in a sense of solidarity with people who have been oppressed, and the working class and whatnot. And I think to a degree you're starting to get that a lot, and they're coming back, and Christians are going back to finding the original message and where they've been. And there's the guys who are like militant peace workers, and they go out and they smash up American bombers. They did that before the Gulf War, and they go to jail for like 6 years. But they're intensely religious, and they intensely believe that if they're not the ones going to go out and stop war and work for peace, then no one else will.
I think a church that deals with people on a practical basis, on a day-to-day basis, the hell and brimstone thing just turns people off. I think people are really receptive to caring people, so if people receive care from the church, I think that would encourage them. So those that need that, I know the churches do try to reach out to people in need, and I think that has probably great encouragement.
I think they've got to get away from the Christian and get back to Christ. I think that's the biggest thing. They've got to get away from our element, the human element, and get back to actually find out who Jesus was and what he stood for and what he did. I think that's the biggest thing. I think the great saying is follow the leader, don't follow the followers. And I think that's what people need to do, is get back to what Jesus said, what Jesus taught, what Jesus did, and once they sort of have that as their basis, then they might have a deeper understanding of what the church is trying to do.
I don't know if it can really, because I like to think that the church is there, it's always there, and it's tradition, and I don't like the idea of a church modernising. Some people might argue against that, but I like to think the church remains as it was. I don't think it needs to be brought into the new age to attract people. I think people have a lot of respect for the church as it is, and to try and get people to church, I'm not sure how that would work really. I'm not sure.
Okay, what did you see? What? Church isn't relevant. What else did you see? Misrepresenting Christ. Did you, when I was watching, I was saying, there are some things where he's saying misrepresenting Christ, but in reality, he doesn't know what Christ really represents. Did you see that? Yeah, solidarity and condoms and things like that. They're ready for change.
They're ready for something a little more tangible, something a little bit more old school, I think, because it's not, and that's what makes church relevant for them, even based on what we read, what we did in the survey.
So I was very interested in watching us go through the last 25 years. And when boomers came up to start to take over and be in the church, there was a real movement to make churches, build churches that didn't look like churches. There was a real movement to do that. And so they, in fact, I can just tell as I look at the church and go to it, I pretty well know about what era that was built because of where we were in the movement of that and who was in charge. So we came to the part of the church where I was in Minneapolis, where the idea was, and they were at the very tail end. When they built that new church, it was at the very tail end of that movement. Tragically, if they'd waited another 6 months or a year, they might have done something different. But they made the church look like a school or a post office or whatever you would like. And so it looked, it just looked like a normal. It had nothing on it that really looked like a church to have happen, because that was supposed to be, they'll come in, they'll love that. That was this Saddleback was the big model for that down in Southern California. You go and it looks like just a big warehouse. In fact, it was just a big building, square building. So there was that kind of development, that kind of thought. But as the young adults came up, did you hear that young lady said, well, I like my church traditional. Did you hear? We had several that are traditional. So right now the swing is coming back the other way, has been for probably about 8 years or so. It's been coming back the other way, where the churches, if they look like a church, the better. In fact, some of the young adult churches are projecting stained glass windows up on the wall so that it looks more, it has a feel of a church. They have candles, they have all those kind of things, and to have happen because they like that type of thing. So it's really, you have to be really careful. Pews are back in style, I guess, to look like a church. This church, when it was built and has happened, it still has a modern, maybe I shouldn't say that, has more of a church feel, and yet it still has an open feel to it. So we're kind of bridging that era where it still looks like a church, but it still has a more open and feel to it. What else did you see in the video? A lot of confusion.
Yeah, I'm part of this era. I mean, I don't know what I believe. I don't know what I want. I'm confused. I want traditional, but I don't want traditional. I want modern thinking, but a traditional building. There's actually just a lot of confusion. I don't really know what I want.
Yes. I heard that all through that video, that same kind of response that I'm not sure what I want, I'm not sure what I have. I like the traditional, I like this, I like that part of it, and I'm not sure where it's going to end up, where it's going to go. You hear that all through that video to have happened. What else did you hear? Yes?
They like traditional architecture and maybe even traditional services to some extent. They're highly critical about traditionalists.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Because the traditional church, I want the church to stay the same, but are you going to attend? Well, no. I'm not going to go. I just want the church to kind of do its thing over there, and I'm not going to attend, not be involved. Yeah.
To piggyback off of that, it sounds like a lot of them feel that the church changes the culture. It's not being true to itself. And something that this culture really goes after is authenticity. And they feel like the church isn't being authentic if they're trying to change that.
Right. This is, yes, go ahead, Jude.
Well, I heard a couple of people in there, a couple of them felt that when they were talking about what kind of a church would they want to go to was where they would be accepted. You know, there was acceptance, a need for acceptance. And that's something we need no matter where we're at. If you come to the doctor's office, you want to be accepted. And if you're in a family, I mean, it's when you feel accepted and loved and cared about. I mean, that's where the church is born.
We're making these videos for the union, and we're going to do another one on Sunday. But it is about kindness and acceptance of people, and that kind of welcoming, that we want our church to be welcoming, because we've all heard stories, we've all been part of people coming in and said, well, nobody spoke to me, or they were rude to me or something, so I don't go. Yes?
I was going to say this last girl, the one that's still on the screen, she really brought it up for me. She said that the church needs to kind of stay the same, stay true to itself, but yet she didn't know how you could use that and still bring the people in. The young people don't necessarily, they don't want to be in church. I guess is what the best way to put it is. I see a lot of people that's like have all the same beliefs, but they don't feel like they need to come.
Yeah. Right. Tomorrow we'll deal a little with that through both the sessions tomorrow about what to do and how that works. Tomorrow we're going to talk about what young people think about the church, and it's fascinating research that's been done about what young adults think about the church. There is a movement that would happen probably 15 years ago called the emerging church. And the emerging church was a phenomenon. It's kind of died off a little bit now, like a trend. But the emerging church was where we kind of sit around in a church, but we take out the pews and we sit on couches. And we kind of just go with the flow a little bit. I was talking to one pastor in his church where the praise team that they have, the people from the audience, the congregation, suggest what they're going to sing that morning. And so madly at the back, the director of the praise team is pulling out the music for his group to sing that song. So they do that, and then they will have prayer and scripture reading, and then instead of saying this is our scripture today, they'll say what has the Lord inspired you to bring to scripture today. And so people pop up here and there and they share a passage of scripture, and then the pastor preaches his sermon. At the end of it, they'll have meditation, and they'll say, okay, you just stay in your pew and stay seated until the Spirit of God leads you to take home what message you got out of that sermon. And so they have people sitting there for 45 minutes to an hour just contemplating the sermon, looking at their Bible, trying to decide. Now, how would that do? Well, we're sorry, we're at 12:15. We have to get stuff out of the oven, and because we're going to eat. So it's just really different. Now, emergent churches tend to be on the liberal side. And there are some things about emergent churches that are attractive because they're trying to be relevant, they're trying to have it. But there's some use of Scripture that's really troubling. There's a difference between being an emergent church and being emergent. I know because I got caught with that and have been critiqued on the internet for that very difference of definition, because the person who's speaking has no idea the difference. When you are emergent, that means you are emerging in and using in part of the culture, trying to be effective in the culture. It has nothing to do with your belief system. It has nothing to do with being liberal or conservative. It means you're trying to impact your community, which don't we all want to do? We want to be emerging and being relevant to our community. But the emergent church movement is something different and something that has happened. Okay, so tonight, I would like for you, as we think and share together, and I'm going to have just a little bit of questions here from you, to think about how our church, how this group, how we're going to be effective in reaching and talking with young adults and looking into the future with what we can do. Now, this is my plan to do this earlier, but we were trying to get a youth pastor here, and we finally got him, and he's almost finished with his schooling, so now I'm just going to dump it in his lap and say good luck. But that's the concept of reaching young adults. Do you have questions about what you heard tonight or clarification? Everybody's clear as mud, huh? Just good. You understand the concept of modernity? You understand the concept of postmodern?
For me, my thought is, the church has always talked about how as the world progresses, there's going to be a strong movement of almost a forced religion, so to speak. So my question to you is, with the open-mindedness and peace, love, there's like a whole other hippie movement going on right now with the young kids. Universalism, there's a meaning out there, but we're not going to call it God because we don't want to be offensive to everybody else. So we're very tolerant now in many ways. But because of that, our country and other countries is out of control. So based on this survey and kind of what we heard here, do you feel that there's going to be a feeling of a push in that direction to straighten out our business, to get our house in order, and do we have to be careful with that?
The short answer I give to you is yes. The culture of the Western world is different than being in the old world or even in the third world. The cultural differences that have happened. When I am here, the respect level of the church family towards me as a pastor is just fine, but it is within our cultural understanding. When I go to Africa, or I minister, we had many from Africa that were in my last church. When I would go to visit them, and part of it, everything stopped, everything went, everybody got quiet. They stood up, they had prepared a seat for me to sit down and to immediately take over whatever was happening. The pastor's here, and he is going to tell us, bless us, have a prayer, whatever. The respect kind of way that culture handled me in dealing with that, whereas a pastor. When I was in Kenya, we were there building the church. And because I was from the mother church in America, they wanted me to speak ex cathedra, like the Pope does on ex cathedra, that this is the way the church, and make decisions about what was going on in their culture and how to handle it, that I would have the answer. And I'm going, oh, wait, I can't speak for the General Conference. But those kind of differences have happened. So we're seeing within our world the rise of ISIS and the Muslim community and these things, where now we're seeing Christians being beheaded, we're seeing terrible things happen, and I believe events of the world will rise and harden lines, and there will be difference of people. Now we're in the West, as far as, and I don't know how that's all going to work out. I don't want to be misunderstood about this. When Ellen White, when I quoted last week from Ellen White, and we were talking about that. There was a time in Ellen White's life, around 1880s, when there was real effort at the U.S. Congress and in the Senate to pass a Sunday law. There was real constant effort to do that. So the review and her comments about it, we got to be careful, we're going to guard our liberties are going to be lost, et cetera, et cetera. Today, right now, I do not see us getting a Sunday law passed. Now, we have a law of mixture. I don't even think there's any legislation before the House. Now, there are some things on religious liberty here and there, but a Sunday law is not there, and I don't see it in the immediate future. However, events can change so quickly on us. And so I just think as watchmen on the wall, that we just need to be aware of the times in which we live. And so your comment about, I'm just going to come back to that, your comment about seeing this trend, we saw a very live and let live kind of thing in the video. We said, we're all going to get along. But as world events change, I believe those events people are going to get hardened to it. Yes.
But I'm not sure what that is.
Yes.
They're trying to be ready for a solution at this point. You mentioned how we have a real good opportunity now to be a group of people that are not like the rest, but are explaining to these people who Christ is, where I'm not sure that others are. It's very fundamental. I spend often in other churches kind of hanging out and see what's up. And it's very fundamental, it's very kind, it's accepting, but at the same time, we still leave the service not getting what you get here, and that is a feeling of who Christ is, feeling special in a one-on-one relationship.
I think in our present culture, where we are now with young adults, that it is important for us to change our method of evangelism to that of sharing the super narrative, the super story. Instead of following, we're going to give you lesson 1, and when you get finished, we're going to go to lesson 2, and you'll see the logic of our arguments as we build each text. You'll see how it builds. The Bible is not structured that way. The Bible is actually structured in story form. And it starts from the beginning into the end, and that great narrative story that is structured in that fashion shows us how God worked for salvation. That story then becomes, and I mean this not to sound puffed up, but becomes superior to the other stories in the culture, because it is the mega story. It is the story of salvation from the very beginning to the end. And the story becomes effective in telling the people. I understand because we learn in story form. And unless it's a test, I'm sorry. But whatever. Yes?
If I look back, that's how Jesus taught.
Exactly.
Parable. That's how Paul and the apostles related in the early church. It was all through story form. Let me take you back to the beginning. You believe in Moses and so on. It wasn't about, they didn't go through Moses' law. That wasn't the when they were preaching in the synagogue on Sabbath, that wasn't the method, it was the stories.
Yes, the methods in the scriptures. So the medieval period that was built, well, I should say the early church period, was built on using that story. When we hit the Reformation, now we're doing our arguments because we're arguing against the church. And we're saying, you're wrong here, and these are the texts. It went very much to a modern argument, and now we're past that in a sense, and now we're trying to work on there. All right, I'm going to let you go home because you guys are already fading fast here to go home. But tomorrow we're going to talk about what young adults really think about the church. And I think it'll help you as you look at that and it comes to understand why we're hitting some of these barriers and things. This is not rocket science, by the way, and it is workable that you can do something. All right, let's have prayer. Father, thank you very much. We thank you for giving us patience and insight. Help us to understand those around us better, that we may show the way to Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.